Last week I got to drive the most powerful production car ever with a Porsche badge. On it, the Taycan Turbo GT, which is Porsche's second sedan that they've ever made and has been relatively successful for a new EV. But today, we're talking about this, the refreshed Porsche Panamera, which is Porsche's first sedan that they've ever made. And besides the fact that one is an electric car and one is not, there aren't too many on-paper differences between the Panamera and Taycan. So today, we're gonna explore why the Panamera still exists and if it really deserves to. To the untrained eye, the new Panamera's design is essentially the same as the previous gen, but there are actually quite a few changes here that make it look a bit more angular and aggressive. We've got these more squared off and angular headlights and these larger, more squared off front intakes on the grille here. It just looks a bit more mean. You've also now got a more streamlined rear taillight that makes it more visually similar to the new Porsche Taycan, but that's pretty much it. Not much has really changed with the design of the facelifted Panamera, and this is just Porsche doing what Porsche does best, which is not making radical switch-ups with every new generation of car. But personally, I think all the changes they have made to the design have made the non-sport GTS turbo models look a bit more attractive and aggressive, if you ask me. Something else I want to point out, because this is my first time reviewing a Panamera, do you see anything about this exhaust tip that looks familiar here? Well, not the tailpipe, but like the actual inner exhaust. Does that look familiar? Yeah, the Porsche Panamera will never actually be able to truly escape its Volkswagen Audi heritage. The interior experience is honestly one of the bigger differentiators between the Panamera and Taycan as far as the overall experience. It's a lot more similar to the Cayenne, honestly. We firstly have our digital gauge cluster, which is obviously fully digital now, no analog tachometer in the middle like the old days, and we of course have our customizable gauges on said screen. And then we have our center screen with Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and the pretty familiar Porsche user interface experience. And then we have our signature Porsche climate control switches in the middle, which are as tactile as they've ever been. You can also option a passenger screen, which you can't see because there's some sort of privacy filter over the screen, which I'm assuming is there to not distract the driver or whoever's in the driver's seat of the car. And this screen has almost as much functionality as the primary center screen for the driver. You can watch videos on here, queue up music, look at the navigation. You even have your own set of dials for performance gauges for the car while the driver is doing their driving. This is honestly one of the more functional passenger displays I've gotten to experience in the car. A lot of EVs and new cars option a passenger screen that really doesn't do much, like the Mercedes passenger screen. I don't find that useful in their EVs, but in here, you actually have quite a lot of room to mess around with things and change settings around and just have a useful screen here. And then if you want to turn it off, you just hit this button and then it turns off. But getting to the back seat of the Panamera is where you'll find another passenger screen in the middle between the two seats. And despite the fact that it's smaller than the passenger screen up front, it's pretty much just as useful as what you'd find up front. You can control navigation, you can play music, you also get the sport chrono dials. You can have all the same functionality. I can control the shades for the sunroof up here. There's a bunch of functionality. Once again, a very useful passenger screen in the rear that you don't have to pay extra for. The Taycan forces you to buy the Porsche rear seat entertainment, which gives you two screens on the back of each seat for you to use, but this comes as standard with the Panamera. You don't gotta pay extra for it. And besides that, this is a pretty roomy back seat. I've got a decent amount of room. I can recline. It's all the way recline right now, but if I want to recline forward, I can do that and enhance my knee support down here. And it's just overall one of the more adjustable rear seats in a sedan that I've gotten to experience. It's overall just a pretty nice rear seat experience and much more luxurious feeling than the equivalently priced Porsche Taycan. We've got the split sunroof up top, we've got the rear seat entertainment, we've got rear cooled seats with memory settings. And you can technically get all of this on the Porsche Taycan, but you would have to spend a little bit more to get it on the equivalent Taycan, which would be the 4S model, which granted is a much quicker car and definitely faster in a straight line, but you'd be getting about nearly half the range, as this Panamera does over 400 miles on a full tank with just a V6, no hybrid, and the Taycan 4S is under 300 miles of range. So there's some compromise. You get a lot more for your money overall with the Panamera. It's much better value depending on who you ask. We should also talk about storage though, because the Panamera has quite a good amount of it for a sedan, and that's because it's technically a hatchback. So the rear trunk of this car, which is the only storage area of this car, has 17.6 cubic feet of space, and that's more than what you get in the Taycan's front and trunk combined. So I've made a lot of comparisons to the Taycan so far, and it might seem like this video is a bit of a anti-Taycan ad, but that's not what this is, and I think that car in its own ways is pretty great. But I'm doing all of this to kind of show you that the Panamera is still kind of the best Porsche sedan if you want more of a focus on luxury and practicality with the storage space and the as standard options in the car. It's pretty great, and I feel like for a lot of people it might make more sense, especially when you factor in the range on this bad boy. But here's what we should find out if this is the best driving Porsche sedan that Porsche makes. Cue the launch control. All right, so from what I know, this should be about a low 5, high 4 second 0 to 60. This isn't, you know, the Turbo SE hybrid version, so I'm not expecting a sub 3 or a 2.5 or something like that. But let's see what we can do. We've got about a half tank, so that should cut a little bit of weight out of the car. That was pretty rapid, wow. Okay. Okay. That felt pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. We got a 4.4. That's pretty good for the base Panamera. 4.4 is, I'm happy with that. I think I want to do it just one more time, but I have a strong feeling 4.4 is probably the best we can get. But 4.4 in the dot, that's pretty impressive for the base level Panamera. That's better than a handful of EVs out there. Man, that dump is just like, wow. That's torquey. 4.43, so yeah, a little bit slower. Yeah, wow. Sub 4.5 for the base Panamera is actually pretty good. This car is quicker than some would expect. So, like I said, this is essentially the base Panamera drivetrain, but you've got all-wheel drive, which makes it a little bit quicker, hence the launch control numbers that we got. So you're looking at about 350 horsepower, powered by a pretty uninspired Volkswagen V6 and geared by an 8-speed dual-clutch PDK transmission. And that's a combo as tried and true as apples and peanut butter. And honestly, I've come away from the experience of driving this car realizing two things. One, that in some ways this is the least Porsche product you can buy, and two, in other ways it's still probably the most Porsche product you can buy. But let me explain what I mean. Despite its pretty solid performance capabilities, the Volkswagen V6 in this car is just really quite boring, honestly, compared to the flat 6 engine used in their sports cars, and the sound in here just really isn't that inspiring at all compared to what you get in a flat 6 in the 911 and 718, or even a straight 6 that you'll find in other German performance cars out there. But the sound in the engine is not really what you buy this car for, and if you've never even heard a flat 6 in action, then you might not even really have a real basis of comparison for what that experience should be like. But regardless, this is the cheapest and coincidentally the least fun engine you can get in one of these cars. If you want the big fun V8 motor, you're gonna have to jump up tens of thousands of dollars to hop into the GTS version of this car, which is gonna offer a radically different experience. The PDK in this car is also quite good, and it's just a reminder for me of the fact that every car made by Porsche should just have the PDK transmission. I'm looking at you, Cayenne. It certainly isn't the fastest or most responsive version of the PDK. If that's what you're looking for, you're gonna have to hop into like a GT car or one of the higher end turbo models, but it does match the V6 powertrain in this car quite well. It truly is the peanut butter to the V6's apple. Overall ride comfort of the Panamera is a bit of a mixed bag. I know they're certainly not advertising this car to be a 7 Series or S-Class competitor in terms of ride quality, but given the fact that this isn't the super sporty version of the Panamera, I do find the ride to be a tad bit firm in certain scenarios. But I wouldn't call this car uncomfortable at all. I could definitely daily this car every day, drive it everywhere, and I would be perfectly fine. I would have no issues doing so. But if you're coming from an S-Class or a 7 Series, especially like a newer model, then you might find the ride to be just a little bit firm over some rough terrain. But if your budget for a Panamera is a little bit flexible, you can opt for the 4SE hybrid model that has Porsche's insane active ride technology. I'm sure you might have seen videos of that technology in action. You don't have that here because you can only get that tech with the support of a hybrid system. So you have to opt for the 4SE hybrid or the Turbo E hybrid or Turbo SE hybrid to get that technology. So we don't have that here, but overall the air suspension in this car is solid. It certainly isn't an uncomfortable car by any means, and it's a lot more comfortable than a 5 Series if you want to compare it to that car. The handling is by far my favorite part of driving this car though. You've got 21-inch wheels with Pilot Sport 5s on them, and man, those tires on this car just makes for an absolutely magical handling experience. It honestly feels as agile and sharp as a lot of my favorite sports sedans I've ever driven. You definitely get some understeer when trying to take a big sweeper at a higher speed, but nothing that's too shocking given how big and heavy this car is at the end of the day. The oversteer is definitely tame. It's nothing too crazy. Man, it just honestly reminds me of the 911 Turbo a little bit in terms of overall handling characteristics, because it's so good to the point of just being a little bit boring. But grip levels are solid. I feel like I could take this on a canyon drive and not feel held back by the car at all, outside of maybe just it lacking a little bit of power. It's honestly a really good car in the handling department. And one thing that I can tell Michelin worked on with the Pilot Sport 5s as opposed to the 4s is the steering reaction. It definitely just feels a lot more quicker to react to certain steering movements, which is something that I like. If we're going to talk about another way this doesn't feel as much like a Porsche to me as other models I've tested, that would be in the steering department. It isn't bad. It certainly doesn't have that generic, electronically controlled steering feel that a lot of new cars have, but it just doesn't feel as connected as other cars I've driven by Porsche recently, like the Taycan Turbo GT, which is an EV, and it's honestly shocking how much better the steering is in Sport Plus in that car than it is in this car. But it certainly isn't bad. When you throw it into Sport Plus, it feels a bit more weighty and quick to react to certain steering movements, but when you have it in normal mode, it just feels very uninspired and not as connected as I've come to learn Porsches are in terms of the steering feel. And that very may well be because I'm driving the 4 model and not, the Turbo or GTS or Turbo SE hybrid. So maybe I need to get my hands on that car to figure out how much better the steering is in that model versus just one of the basic 4 or 4S models. But all this super performance nitpicky stuff, this is really something that someone who probably wouldn't buy the 4 would be complaining about. If I had the Turbo and was complaining about stuff like this, I feel like that would make sense because that's the performance-oriented model. This is just a regular Panamera, but with all-wheel drive. But the whole point of the Panamera is to have GT with sporty credibility, and so that's why I'm bringing up these things in the first place. But overall drivability of the car is really solid, especially with a good pair of tires like I've got on here right now. It's definitely a car that you could, drop the kids off to school in and then have a little bit of fun on the ride home if you've got a nice road to go on. And these standard Panamera 4 models are certainly not going to hold their value as much as the Turbo and Turbo SE hybrid models. And so when these eventually drop, for a little over 100 grand, this is a pretty good ride overall. I can't believe I'm sending it on this road in the way I am in a Panamera. The speed I'm able to carry through these bends is just, man. Well, after driving this car for about a week, I am convinced that this truly does stand on its own alongside the Taycan. They're both 4-door touring cars made by Porsche, designed for you to go fast and comfort. But the experience here is significantly different just because of a bunch of little things that you do. You have the hatchback functionality, which, technically you can achieve with a Sport Turismo or Cross Turismo Taycan, but you can also get a wagon version of the Panamera as well. Actually, wait, no, you can't, not anymore, but you used to be able to. And yes, this may not be the Turbo SE hybrid version that is super fast and a lot more engaging probably and a lot more capable on a track, but this does offer you a lot of the joy that you get from the analog driving experience, being able to control your own gears, hearing some form of an engine, it just really does have a different experience overall, which is not something I was expecting, quite honestly. And so I understand why the Panamera is still alive and why people still continue to buy it. If you want a Porsche and want the ultimate driving experience for 150 grand, you can buy like a 911 or a Cayman GT4, but that'll only seat 2 people and be stiffer than that one loaf of bread that you bought a week ago and forgot to fully seal. In terms of the luxury, the tech, the convenience, this is just a really great package. Not to mention, it's an actual daily driver you can take your kids to school in and things like that. If I had $150,000 to spend and wanted to buy a Porsche, I'd probably just buy a used Panamera Turbo S, but hey, that's just me. If you want something new, this is a great buy, and I'm sure it'll probably come down a little bit in the next handful of years. But I would really love to see how much better this setup could be with, you know, a V8 or maybe a hybrid setup. So Porsche, if you're watching and want to send your boy a Turbo or a Turbo S e-hybrid, I will not say no to that whatsoever. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future content like this. And also, if you want to support the channel, we have merch that you can buy, carswithmiles.com. This is just one of a few designs we have available. And yeah, that's about it. More German car content coming soon. Probably not what you expect, though. I'm pretty hyped for the next video. All right, talk to you guys in the next one.